Are you a dog behavior geek like me? Join me for my absolute favorite weekend of the year, the 2025 Dog Behavior Conference. If you've attended before, you know how special the DBC is. And if you've never joined us for this amazing 3-day online event, it's truly a one-of-a-kind gathering of like-minded dog geeks, pet pros, trainers, and animal advocates from all over the world. Registration is now open at dogbehaviorconference.com, and the virtual live conference takes place on April the 4th to the 6th. And discounted early bird seats are on sale now through January. So, reserve your spot today at dogbehaviorconference.com. That's dogbehaviorconference.com. I'll see you there. Nothing newsworthy in the UK when it comes to dogs happens without my next guest knowing about it. She is a mine of information, and I thought it is time. I had her on the podcast a year ago, but it is time to speak with editor of Dogs Today, Beverley Cuddy, and I'm really happy she's here, and also to celebrate the fact that Dogs Today magazine is 35 years old this year. That is amazing. Beverley, welcome to the podcast and congratulations.
Oh, thank you for having me. I do feel very old because 35 years being editor of the same magazine. Some people would say that shows a lack of ambition, but honestly, it's the best job in the world. So there is nowhere I want to go. So I'm happy to be keeping doing what we're doing. And there's still so much to do.
You are right about that. I wrote for Dogs Today for 14 years, and then I had to pass the torch because I'm not necessarily that I was running out of things to write, because there's so much stuff to write. It's just that, was I going to be able to contribute the way that I had been, because life changes. So, but I feel very proud to have written for such a great magazine for 35 years. And this is a huge benchmark. I don't think people understand that in magazine world, 35 years is a long, long, long time.
It's true. We weren't sure if I was the longest, and we asked around, and the British Society of Magazine Editors did some research and found that Private Eye, which is our big satirical magazine, the editor there is a couple of years ahead of me. And then number 2, Anna Wintour of Vogue, and then little me. So, yeah, it does seem unusual. But I think that for me, dogs are the world. And there are so many issues that need, dogs just need a voice, basically. And we need to make it a better world. And we're only just begun. Some of the campaigns have lasted 10 years before they've come to fruition. And I think some of the things that we're attempting to change will take more than one person's lifetime. I think someone else is going to have to carry on after us to try and make it so that dogs are treated better in every way. They are unfortunately not protected enough from the rigors of fashion and poor choices made by humans.
So you speak from experience, and I want to go back, because as well as being an editor and your passion for dogs, I know we spoke about that in the last podcast, but I'd like to talk about the Kennel Club. Now, we've got Crufts coming up in March, and we attend Crufts every year. I have a booth there every year. Some people criticize me for it. Others obviously support me for it. I love the fact that it's a celebration of the dog, that we can do a lot of good work there, educating people about their own dogs. And that's why we have a stand every year. I have been part of filming at Crufts during the BBC, for the BBC in 2008, and then for More 4 and Channel 4. And then I was Richard and Judy's roving reporter, So I've been at Crufts, and in fact, it's Me or the Dog did 2 stories about 2 different dogs that were being shown at Crufts. But I'm not I love the celebratory part of it, but I'm not a dog show person. And there have been a lot of difficulties within the Kennel Club in the last few years. So can you tell me what is going on at the Kennel Club now? Because it feels like there's been a ton of changes, but it's sort of everything's kind of been a bit hush-hush.
Yes, it is hard times. I think what's happened has been a number of factors. For a start, the world has changed, and the Kennel Club is no longer the centre of the world for pedigree dogs or any dogs really in Britain. Statistically, more people are buying their dogs through other means. So Kennel Club registered dogs have become a smaller percentage of the canine population. That's a problem in some ways because it means that there is nobody counting. There's no one checking on the health tests. There's no one. It's all gone a bit sort of Wild West. So they've lost their influence. They've become sidelined. And the numbers of people who show dogs, who are registering dogs, has declined spectacularly. And the finances of the Kennel Club have also been hit really hard. So we've got an old institution that is leaking money and is in trouble. And I actually do care greatly about their future, weirdly, because I used to, confession time, I used to be a show dog person. When I was a child, I used to show dogs. I used to judge dogs. I was a breed club secretary. I was embedded in that world. And I know that, I know the mess that is happened is not good for dogs generally. We need a strong kennel club. We need somebody that is there for the general public when they buy a dog, that navigates them through to help them avoid the puppy farms, helps them find best practice. We desperately need them to do well and to behave themselves. Unfortunately, it's all gone a bit wrong. And I don't really understand quite why it's gone so badly wrong. We've lost momentum, we've lost direction, and at the moment nobody seems to be leading it out of the mess. And I would love to see something happen where they do repair themselves and they do become what they could be, because we need someone at the centre of the dog world giving some leadership as to, well, the future really. And there was a really interesting article in something called The Atlantic about how there could be a third wave of domestication in dogs, which I think is terribly exciting. I think the idea of the past was dogs bred for a purpose that was, shooting, hunting, guarding, all these other jobs. If we redefine the purpose as being man's best friend and being a pet, and navigate our way out of all the bottlenecks and all the problems that have come from breeding for a human idea of beauty rather than any other logical thing to do, that might be the future. But at the moment, I'm not seeing anything from the Kennel Club that suggests they're going to rebrand themselves. The only rebranding they've done is to add the word royal to their name, which most people are running away from those sort of historic sort of connections, but they seem to be embracing tradition rather than innovation.
Because, of course, King Charles is now patron, isn't he?
That's right. Well, we always had the Queen before that, but she was actually quite sniffy about it, because the Queen was a real proper dog lover, and she had, as well as the corgis and the Labradors and the Cocker Spaniels, she had several dorgies, which were corgis crossed with dachshunds, and her mother had the same cross. And she insisted when she was patron that if the Kennel Club would have a portrait of her, they had to include the dorgies. So she always had a little wicked sense of humour about it also, that she wouldn't take it all too seriously, that dogs were dogs. And she didn't really, I don't think she was interested in the show side of it, really. but she was I don't think she was she was very obviously loving dogs generically rather than particularly supporting the show world. And I don't know that Prince Charles is going to be an active contender at Crufts. I don't think he will be either. But I think he just thought it was nice to mark he just loves dogs. I'm hoping that maybe at the next AGM there'll be some sort of movement where we'll get the members going. Come on, let's sort it out. Let's stop losing money. Let's change some things and make it so that the decline is managed. But over here we have a retail site that has become the place where people go to find their dogs, and many more people go online to buy a dog through them than through the Kennel Club now. So they've kind of missed the boat. And
is this retail site a good one? I mean, is it responsible?
Well, the problem is it's the internet, isn't it? So there's I've decided to engage with them and talk to them, and that these are quite entrepreneurial chaps who've bought massive internet sales sites in every country. So they're Swedish, and I was hopeful because Sweden has got really good things in place for dogs. So I was thinking, there may be some hope here. And from the early talks with them, I think they do want to change the way dogs are sold. And I think it may be that the reforms that we're looking for from the Kennel Club, you may find it voluntarily coming from the retail sector instead, whereas they want to protect the future of people buying dogs online. So they need to clean up the space. So they are the ones who are calling for reforms of microchipping, because at the moment our microchip system's a mess. We've got 20 or so databases that are not really, well, they're all doing different things, and they're not recording who the breeder is, which is something that was meant to be in there. It was meant to be a permanent record as who bred every dog that's in the country. The retail sites would really like the microchip system to work so that when you register a dog for sale, you record the parents' microchips. It's all traceable. It makes it so that people who steal dogs won't be able to retail them, because this will be, you won't be able to sell a dog if you aren't able to claim that you're the legal owner. So reforms may come, they just might come from a different direction than we expected. But I'm hoping that the Kennel Club doesn't just get smaller and smaller and smaller. I hope that it does embrace all dogs, because that's the problem, is that there's only a percentage of people who show dogs, who breed dogs very closely, where it's really important that, I don't know, that side of things seems to be on the decline, whereas the retail site is full of people doing what are called designer crosses, which aren't really designer crosses these days. They're just poodles crossed with cocker spaniels, and people don't really know why they're doing that cross, apart from the public want them.
Yes, they're very, very popular. And I think people kind of see these fluffy dogs and think, oh, well, that's good. They're going to be hypoallergenic and they're not going to shed, and don't really realize that you've got two very, very active breeds right there that are combined. And we certainly see in the behavior world that can cause some issues regarding behavior as well. If you don't if you don't breed these dogs right and you don't raise them right, we always have this, and it's not a joke, but sometimes we go, oh, we have a client now and there's a dog that's resource guarding, and we always say sort of amongst our trainers, stop you there. Is it a doodle? Yeah, it's a doodle. And that's really sad, but people are getting these dogs thinking that they're the small fluffy bears or large fluffy bears, and they don't realize the dog that they have.
Yeah. I think that people fell in love with the look of the dog without really understanding what was going on between their ears. And that's always been the problem, the impulse purchase of dogs. But also I think that the public felt the need to find a dog that was bred to be a pet. But we haven't got anyone actually producing dogs with temperament in mind and ease of living with people. And I think this idea of this third wave of domestication is interesting, that if we look at assistance dogs, and we've had 100 years of dogs doing jobs where they help us in various ways, those dogs have been bred for health and suitable temperaments and lots of other things. And those criteria are quite useful to maybe stretch across to the pet world. So that some of those attributes, if we could encourage progressive breeders to breed dogs that is their job, is to fit around what is a normal existence for a pet dog, and design these dogs backwards, rather than people choosing on appearance without much help. And I do think that the internet sites are quite keen on changing the habits of the public so that they get it right, so that they don't just buy the dog they think they want. With the use of more intelligent sort of software and AI and predictive stuff, you might be able to stop a few people making these disastrous decisions where they just go on, oh, I like that colour, or I like that, make it a little bit more, set people up to succeed. Because at the moment, I think people are looking for guidance, and there isn't anybody, obviously, but
and
they
you
don't know
would
who to trust.
you would hope that the Kennel Club would be those ones to guide. And I think part of the problem, well, I know a huge part of the problem was the upgrade that they had in their database. The Kennel Club database holds information on millions of pet dogs across the country. They raised their fee, I think it was from £17 to register a puppy to £25. But during this database upgrade, they had losses. Something went wrong, and this mounted to losses to £1.2 million in 2022 and £1.6 million in 2023. That's a whole load of losses. And then that seemed to be the huge icing on this cake that was being baked and has been baked for many years. And I know that the Kennel Club has been challenged, but when I was filming, I remember speaking with Jemima Harrison. And Jemima Harrison is the producer of Pedigree Dogs Exposed that was broadcast by the BBC. It was a documentary in 2008, and it was exposing many of the breeds that were being bred for basically beauty rather than function and health. And then there was the Pedigree Dogs Exposed 3 years on in 2012 that was broadcast on BBC 4 that followed the King Charles Cavalier. How was that? These dogs seem to suffer from heart disease. Then this terrible brain problem, and I can never pronounce it, but that's the
Syringomyelia,
Syringomyelia, which is, if you think about, you have a size 10 shoe and you're trying to fit it into a size 6 shoe. Well, that's what the dog's brain is like inside a skull. So you've got a very large brain inside a very small skull, and that causes horrific headaches and horrific problems. Dreadful, traumatic for these King Charles Cavaliers. And it's not all the King Charles. It's all the bulldogs out there, Neapolitan Mastiffs, the German Shepherds. I mean, all of these dogs that are so compromised because they've been bred a certain way for beauty, for conformation, but not with health in mind. And pedigree dogs really expose that. And that's why the BBC, who had been airing Crufts for years, pulled out of it in 2009. And of course, since then, it was taken over by More 4 and Channel 4. But that seemed to be the death knell for the Kennel Club, really exposing what was going on.
But in a way, it was a good wake up call, and it was the things that were put in place after that were quite promising. There were quite a number of there was a lot of rushing about and sorting things out, and there were things put in place that should have set up the Kennel Club for success in the future, because it was a shock to them that they've been caught out. But the problems was that there's been other problems at the Kennel Club since then, where they've had distractions of infighting. So a lot of the good work has actually now been trashed. There was something called the Assured Breeder Scheme that came out of all of this, which set out criteria that made, was able for the public to identify who is a breeder who's doing their best to do health testing or whatever. And it was promising. We thought, well, here we go. We should have always had health testing as part of registration. Other countries did that. Sweden did it from the start. But that's now been scrapped because it was expensive. They've brought something else in that's called the breed standard, I think, or they're calling it the breed health standard, which has not been, nobody's been consulted. It's just been sort of dumped on everybody. And there's a lot of people who are very skeptical of this as to why this new system's been brought in. There's a fear that it's just a way of making more money. But it might work. It's based on epidemiology rather than preventative health tests, which some people say is completely the wrong way of looking at it. Because if you were to look at dogs like farm animals and you go, well, let's see, we'll only worry about a health problem when a significant number of dogs have got it. So the testing only clicks in when you've got a serious problem in the breed, rather than somebody getting a DNA test and going, this is really awful. We want to make sure we don't get this problem in our breed. They won't actually say you have to test until a percentage of the breed suffering from it, which it's not farm animals. These are domestic pets. I mean, you don't want to have a heart problem or another serious problem if you can avoid it. You want to breed away from it. You don't want to wait till it's so bad that you have to then start testing.
So this is reactionary, really.
Yeah,
it's not being a proactive. Is this all about money, though? Is this because it's just cheaper? The Assured Breeder Scheme is actually too expensive?
I think they decided that they kind of needed to either make the Assured Breeder better or give up. And they chose just to give up. Because what they'd done was set the bar so low that in some breeds, it was possible to be an assured breeder and do nothing because there was no health tests required, because at that point nobody had come up with any health tests for that breed. So all the puppy farmers could join the Assured Breeder Scheme, get loads of benefits. And those people who were really good breeders said, I wouldn't want to be in the same scheme that those people are in. So they ended up dividing and not conquering. So they really needed to reform what they had already started to make the bar a bit higher, to make it more of, because I always thought, wouldn't it be lovely if the best practice involved the best possible rearing, so that you had extra accolades for people who did all the early learning, so that the puppies were house trained and socialized, and you had some way that wasn't just saying, oh, that's a champion. You'd have, that's actually somebody who's invested in learning how to bring up puppies to be happy, healthy dogs for the rest of their lives. So, yeah, it could have been better. It's gone now, so we'll never get it back. But this new scheme of giving each breed good practice and excellent practice, without it being totally okayed by all the breed aficionados, is kind of unpopular, because like in my own breed, bearded collies, it's now only recommended that you do hips and eyes, and that's to people who've been doing this for 30 odd years, 40 years, 50 years. They're absolutely pulling their hair out, because they say, of course we must test the hips and the eyes and the elbows of these dogs, and only breed from the best. But now we're only being told it's only advised, it's not essential.
Gosh, this seems to be very wishy-washy. Who's making the decisions here? Who is at the Kennel Club that's making decisions? So this is the old guard, new people they brought in. Who's doing this?
It seems, well, they were investors. After Pedigree Dogs Exposed, they got very involved in the Canine Genetics Centre. But when the money started drying up, they suddenly, very abruptly, pulled all the money from the Canine Genetics Centre, which was a real shock, because there was some great long-term projects being done there. It was all about the future. So they pulled all their resources from something that was excellent, And now that they've seemed to be going with this different way of looking at health that is retrospective, where you only say there's a problem when statistically there's a problem, rather than let's put preventative things in place. And it's I don't think anyone else has used that model apart from maybe in farming. And I just think it is a bit experimental. And I think the idea is to come up with a framework that's really attainable. So the bar is very low. And then they will probably make it so that if you register and do these minimal things that they're now saying you should do, you may get it slightly cheaper, the registration, if you come up to these minimum standards that are very, very weak. And then they may charge more to the bad breeders to get their foot on the ladder. But I just don't think it's going to solve their financial problems. And I don't think it'll make it any clearer to the general public, because the difference between good practice and excellent practice, I think the general public that's not clear. You need like a traffic light system of red, yellow and green. You need to know this should be done, or this, to be a good breeder, you need to do this. You just don't go, well, you're quite a good breeder, or it's wishy-washy. It's not thinking it through. The general public want their hand holding and confidence. They need to be told, there's a reason to do it this way.
Well, they need it because they're not the experts. And I think, I'm very involved in the rescue world, but that doesn't mean to say that I don't support good breeding. And I think these breeders are really being left without a lot of support from the one place that has been held up since 1873, the Kennel Club was founded, and has supported breeders throughout. And breeders need support. And if the Kennel Club aren't going to be that, then they're going to have to go elsewhere. They're going to have to go to some organization, as you say, that is going to be a bit less wishy-washy and able to fund programs that help these breeders be successful and also help the public choose the right kind of dog. Yes,
definitely. I do think that, it's such a shame. I hate to see the Kennel Club floundering. And I desperately would like to see them put somebody in charge we've had the chief executive that they brought in a few years ago was from outside of this world. He'd come from charities, and he paid, I think, about £1 million in research to find out why they were losing money and what they needed to do to change it, which is. I think a lot of us could have said in 10 minutes, this is what you need to do to get out of this mess.
So basically he spent $1 million on an audit, really, to find out what was going wrong. And he's left. Wow.
Yeah. So that kind of was meant to be, the road out. But it's not been. The problem is the Constitution and the way that the membership and the board, it's very Victorian. It's neither a business or a charity. It doesn't really know what it is. So it's very difficult for it to heal itself. I used to say the same about the RSPCA, that it was the victim of its own history, because being a Victorian organisation, it had a really peculiar constitution. They've had a chief executive who's sadly now left, but the last chief executive of the RSPCA sorted it out. He actually did do all of those revisions to the Constitution. He did make it much more fit for purpose, and has put it back together. And it's now not failing. It was failing. It's still things that you'd want it to be better at, but it's a sign that a dinosaur did actually avoid extinction, and it is getting healthier. I'd love to see a chief executive that was equally skilled at the helm at the Kennel Club, who would change its direction and make it fit for purpose. But
I agree.
I don't know that it will happen in my lifetime.
Oh,
It's so
well,
sad.
Beverly, I really hope so, because as you say, however much, the people who don't like the Kennel Club and don't like what they're doing and don't like, we definitely need to have an organization that supports dogs in this country and pedigree dogs in this country. And, even I've experienced just at Crufts, being a stand holder, some real difficulty in even in some of the things that or software that they might have updated that has caused some issues with even stand holders, not getting information and not getting emails and, things going awry. And you're thinking, but this organization needs to get their act together. Otherwise, it's just going to go south. Well, thank you so much for kind of clarifying all of that. I'm going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I'd like to talk about, oh my gosh, how the XL bully ban is going. All right, we'll be right back. I wanted to be sure you knew about a unique opportunity to learn with me in person this year. The Victoria Stilwell Academy's Dog Trainer course in-person track for 2025 is enrolling right now through March the 12th. Learn more by visiting vsdogtrainingacademy.com. You can enroll in free starter courses, the fully refundable fundamentals course, the flagship online dog trainer course, and, until mid-March, this year's class of VSA in-person students. Learn more and find out if the in-person track is right for you at vsdogtrainingacademy.com. Again, that's vsdogtrainingacademy.com. We'll see you there. All right, Beverley. It was about a year ago, wasn't it, that the XL bully ban came into effect? If you have what is deemed an XL bully, then you have to get it registered, microchipped, or you had a certain time. It was a year ago that it came into effect, but before that, you had a certain time to register your XL bully if you thought your dog met the standard. And you can have an exemption if your dog is microchipped and neutered and muzzled in public places at all times. So that came into what's been happening, because I did talk to somebody regarding rescue, and they're saying that if an XL bully comes into rescue, they have to euthanize. I mean, that's the law, which is just dreadful. Yeah. What is happening now in the UK when it comes to breed bans? And for people who say, well, that doesn't really affect me, for listeners who say, it does, because there's breed bans in all different parts of the world. So what's going on now?
Right. Well, it's a complete mess. The XL bully ban was brought in so rapidly that the whole infrastructure around that just doesn't exist. Quite suddenly, a huge percentage of the country had to suddenly muzzle their dogs, do all this, get them neutered in a real rush, and these are very big dogs. So vets really were struggling to actually just keep up. And since then, we've had all this other problem where there's not been enough training given to all the local authorities as to what to do when they get a complaint from the general public that there may be an XL bully that isn't registered. It's absolutely shocking that the district licensing officers got 1 day of training as to how to do this, how to
1 day.
Assess. Yeah, 1 day.
1 day of training.
Yeah, it's just criminal. So people who in a day had to learn how can you decide whether this dog has to be muzzled and neutered and potentially killed. Also, there was no provision made for suddenly have to find space for all these dogs that were going to be seized. The police kennels, the secure kennels, were already full before this started. So the overcrowding issues of putting all these dogs that have been taken away from their homes and have been squashed into places that they shouldn't be, in places with very poor conditions. These dogs have been really treated so badly. So dogs that maybe have entered kennels for the process of being typed or not typed may have gone in temperamentally sound, are deeply damaged by the process. People are getting back dogs that are really emaciated, full of sores. Some people aren't getting their dogs back apart from in a body bag because they don't survive the process. So it's a terrible mess. And we're seeing it still as bad as it's ever been because overcrowding in all these police kennels is just so bad. And that there are not enough resources given to this thing. So people will phone in a spot because the public can't tell what's an XL bully and what isn't. It's just a big dog. So dogs are getting seized that aren't type. They're getting ruined. And people are just, the wrong sort of people are getting involved. People are dumping dogs. They're tying them up. We've never seen this sort of atrocity before. It's unprecedented. People in rescue are absolutely pulling their hair out because officially you can't do anything. It's a death sentence if a dog ends up in rescue. But there's an awful lot of people who don't want that to happen and will just try and do anything to avoid it. So there's lots of people put in impossible situations every day, and there's no appetite for the politicians to sort the mess out. They knew that it was a failed piece of legislation. Breed-specific legislation didn't work. The big legal challenge that everyone put money into, every effort was taken to get this tested in court. Sadly, it's very difficult to overturn this sort of thing. I think all hope has been lost now. With the hearing went as well as it could do, but it was no surprise really that it wasn't overturned. So we're having to live with this pathetic piece of legislation that doesn't make anyone any safer. We've had the same number of fatalities last year as we had before the ban. It's not made people any safer.
Now, it seems like that now they're turning their attention onto the cane corso. There was last week, I think it was, a few weeks ago, This Morning, which is a morning program for you who don't live in the UK. It's a morning program and just a current affairs, kind of everything program, a good old morning show. And they had this segment on, is this Britain's next most dangerous dog? And they had a lovely man on there with his gorgeous dog who's just a big mush on there talking about it with Dr. Scott, the vet. And now it seems like if the XL bully ban's not enough and the pit bull ban and the Dojo Argentina and all of that, now they're turning their attentions to this other very large breed, the Cane Corso.
Yeah, I wouldn't be at all surprised if we see it added to the legislation, and then they'll just have to keep having to add because there's so many other variants of big dogs. It's not going to stop the fatalities, and I don't think we really understand why this all happened. And this is all this knee-jerk reaction stuff. It isn't going to make the public any safer. I think we've really just got to, understand that it's Darwin in some ways. We have a population that is attracted to doing the wrong thing, and we have a system that doesn't regulate. So anyone can breed dogs, anyone can sell dogs without any consequence, and people cash in, and people give people the thing that they think they want, but they don't really know that they can't handle. So lots and lots of people acquiring enormous dogs with no skills, and it goes wrong. But people don't seem to learn from this and think, well, perhaps I'll get a dog that I can manage next time. It's all just seen as, oh, it's the dog that's the problem. It's not. It's the human that's the problem who keeps making the wrong choices. But until we get the government to have joined up thinking on breeding and selling dogs and training dogs, it's such an unregulated space. We will just get knee-jerk legislation that we all hate. I don't know that. I haven't got really any words of positivity about this, apart from it's probably going to get worse. I think we are going to end up with more legislation. I don't think this government's got any appetite to sort this mess out. Right, I'm hoping this year to get my teeth into a new campaign. We got pet theft sorted last year.
Yes, which was fantastic.
It's so unlikely that we'd get that legislation through on the very last day of Parliament. So we've done impossible things before. I'd like to sort out microchipping this year to get it actually doing more for the dogs, because at the moment it's redundant. There is a way that the chip could be much more powerful as being a link to who bred this dog, so that when something goes wrong, instead of us all just going, oh, there's a naughty dog, or let's blame the breed, we actually look at who sold this dog in the first place, who bred it, and maybe make it so that there is some consequence to breeding dogs that eventually do something dreadful that kills somebody. Some way of making it so that you can't just invisibly breed dogs without your local council knowing about it, or the tax people, so that it becomes more transparent, so that there is a log as to who produces all these dogs that end up in rescue, all end up in with the dog warden or in the headlines. But if the government can see that there's a way of recovering some income from this very grey area of dog breeding, it might excite them. So we might be able to trick them into some reform, whereas they don't really want to do proper animal welfare reform that isn't fluffy. It might make it so that it becomes something that if you do it well, you can be proud of. If you breed dogs that the public have a very positive experience from, then you can stand out and be proud of what you do, and that we can finally get rid of all these awful people who smuggle dogs, who steal dogs and then breed from them. All these awful industries that we've got that have crept in. The chip might well be the thing, the very little tiny thing that helps us attain some of the reforms that we need. And I'm hoping that we won't have the same rush to market that we had in the pandemic, where all those people, that was like pyramid selling, people were breeding XL bullies, and just everybody nearly had one that could possibly have one. So we ended up with a huge number of people in the population acquiring dogs suddenly that were bred by people who'd never bred before. And the consequences of that we're still living with. That there was no checks and balances to stop that happening. It just was like a fire that just took off. We need to have some consequence, so that if you breed, you've got some responsibility and you are traceable. So,
that's the thing, isn't it? You are traceable. You have to be held accountable. If you are going to breed dogs and your dogs go on and they go to a home, something happens, you need to be held accountable. Not just for that, you need to be held accountable for the health of the line of dogs that you are breeding. There needs to be checks and balances. Otherwise, it becomes the Wild West, which it feels like it is becoming. And has become in the UK, certainly is here in the United States. But there are good people in the world doing great things like you are, Beverley. And what I love about it is that you have been a consistent voice. Now, I know sometimes you might address things that people don't want you to address, and you might be considered controversial at times because people don't want to hear the truth. They don't want to be exposed to the truth. But I think that's why I admire you, not just being an editor of a magazine that has lasted for 35 years, which in this world is incredibly difficult. So again, congratulations for that. But somebody who has stuck to their guns for the health and wellness of dogs in the UK and beyond. And so I am glad that when there is a dog issue that people call you to talk to you, that you're regular on radio and on television and in the media, continuing to speak up for dogs and their welfare, and therefore in turn, the people like all of us who love them. So thank you so much, for joining me on the podcast again, because I'd like to have you back again as a regular guest, as we need these updates. We need things to have some clarity, but also for doing the work, because it's not easy. I understand that from my side, just on the training part, it's not easy when you advocate, right? There's a lot of armchair critics out there, but it's also not easy being in your position where you're holding people accountable in the government, at the Kennel Club, in these huge organizations that need to have checks and balances on them.
Yes, it is sometimes a little tricky. There was a story in the last issue that a lot of people said you shouldn't go anywhere near, but I think sometimes you have to tell the story, even though nobody's completely innocent in the story. You have to expose the wider issue. There was very brief, there was a dog that was a rescue dog, and there was a fight between the rescue and the adopters as to what was the best thing to do with this dog. And it ended up going to the High Court to prove a precedent, which is a really interesting precedent now that's on our statute book. And that was that the rescue's contract was actually stood up in court, which we'd all been told these contracts are nonsense. But this one gave the rescue the power to be consulted as a co-owner if that dog was put to sleep for anything other than a veterinary emergency. And the High Court ruled that, yes, the rescue was legally a co-owner and had to be consulted, and they'd requested a second opinion before this dog was put to sleep. No one expected them to win that injunction. Sadly, it was too late and the dog had already been put to sleep. But that issue caused a huge amount of upset, because there was a vigil outside the vets who loads of people were upset that this dog had been put to sleep. But really, it wasn't, whilst it's bad that the vets felt really got at for making what was an impossible decision, vets in future will be put in that position a lot more times now, because if we accept that adoption means you never really own your dog, if these contracts have a place in law, that will change the way people who adopt dogs view ownership. And it will also mean that rescues, actually, if they do put that contract in their contracts, they could potentially become liable for any vet costs, because if you are now a co-owner of every dog that you have rehomed, legally, that's big news, because you couldn't afford to, if somebody reneges on paying their vet bill, those rescues couldn't afford to pick up those bills. So for us, it was a story you had to cover. Yes, it was very sad that the vets felt got at, that they were, but they were put in an impossible situation. You have to tell that story for us to realise that be careful what we wish for, because those rescue contracts could mean the end of rescue if they actually become commonplace.
So if you don't tackle these uncomfortable topics, and people like myself and every dog lover out there doesn't have a chance to read them and learn from them and see different sides to maybe a bias that we have, we're never going to learn, and things aren't going to get better.
Yeah, it's sometimes there is no goodies and baddies in these. There's lots of grey area, but it is a fascinating job. And my dogs are woofing again. What a surprise.
They're saying, Mum, we're done. So, look, thank you so much. I know they need you. But thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. Really appreciate it. And for updating us on everything UK that, again, does have influence around the world. Thank you so much, Beverley. And I hope that you join me again at some point in the future.
Would love to. Thank you for doing this podcast. It's important that we join everyone up and we all pull together to look after our best friend, the dog. So thank you for doing this.
Well, everybody, thanks again for listening. I thought that was absolutely fascinating. If you don't know, haven't read Dogs Today, get it, subscribe. It's an absolutely brilliant magazine. It's my favorite magazine out there. And it just gives you so much information on a lot of the news that's going on, but also everything dog, right? From training to behavior to health It's just a great magazine. So go get it. Subscribe. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And you all take care. And I'll see you on another podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to Victoria Stilwell's Positively podcast. For Victoria's online dog training courses, more information, and helpful dog training tips, visit Victoria's official website at positively.com. Get connected on Facebook, Instagram, and other social media as Victoria Stilwell, and follow her on Twitter at Victoria S. Learn to become a professional dog trainer with the Victoria Stilwell Academy at vsdogtrainingacademy.com. And be sure to tune in next time as Victoria helps you and your dog live your best life together, positively.